Jennifer, can you please join us? Thank you. We can get started. All right, the October the 11th Kansas City Public Schools Board meeting for our Board Policy 1.1 meeting is called to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Miss Manser,
Here.
Miss Wolfsey,
Here.
Miss Lewis, Mr. Oates,
Here.
Mr. Fierro, Mr. Evans,
Here.
Mrs. Morris, Dr. Hartsfield, and Miss Robinson.
Here, is there a motion to approve the absence of board members Hartsfield, Fierro, and Morris?
So moved. Second.
Is there any discussion? The motion is to approve the absence of Hartsfield, Fierro, and Morris. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Miss Manser,
Yes.
Miss Wolfsey,
Yes.
Miss Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. Oates,
Yes.
Mr. Fierro, Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Mrs. Morris, Dr. Hartsfield, and Miss Robinson.
Yes, their absences are approved. At this time, we will turn it over. Oh, if there is no objection, I would like to approve the agenda by acclamation. Seeing none, the agenda is approved. We would like to turn it over to our superintendent, Dr. Mark Bedell, to do our workshop presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To our community and to the board, many of you are aware that we have ends that our administration is held accountable for, and in particular, the superintendent job is to ensure that as we look at Board Policy Series 1.0 and Board Policy Series 4.0, that we are doing everything in our due diligence to live up to meeting what those policies dictate. Today, we have a monitoring update on our Board Policy 1.1. This is going to be a little bit different, and I think that in collaboration with speaking with our board chair and members of the board, they wanted us to provide as close to as a transparent presentation as possible, but we also want our community to know that we do have a pulse on every single one of our schools. We have a focus, an academic focus. We have an academic framework that we're putting in place. There's an aligned sense of purpose with professional development, aligned sense of purpose with the training around our curriculum. But most importantly, we know where our schools are. We know where they are from an APR standpoint. We know how many schools, when you break it down by those that are fully accredited, provisionally accredited, and unaccredited. Today, we're going to provide you all with our two assistant superintendents a thorough presentation on where we are and give you all assurances that we do have our fingers on the pulse in terms of what we want, where we want to see this school district go. And then for our board, because of confidentiality reasons, in your Friday update, you will receive information that pertains to some of the examples that we provide for you today around the way that we're looking at monitoring. And with our community, generally it is my practice and my expectation that each of the schools that reside within your respective communities, that those schools are providing you all with an up-to-date state of the school presentation that allows for you to have an understanding of where the school is, the direction it's trending in, and ultimately, how can you all help? How can you all help us maintain that level of accountability to perform for your children? So without any further talking, I would ask our two assistant superintendents to come up, introduce yourselves, and let's go with the show.
Thank you, Dr. Bedell. To Board Chair Robinson, board members, Dr. Bedell, and other community members. Again, I'm Anthony Lewis, one of the assistant superintendents.
And I'm Elizabeth Austin, the Assistant Superintendent of Leadership for the East and Northeast feeder patterns.
And I have the best side, central and the southeast side that we're responsible for, but together we work very well together in supporting our schools. we're definitely excited to present to you some of the work that we're doing in our schools, as well as what we're doing from our district-wide intervention standpoint down to what we're doing for our fully accredited schools, our provisionally accredited schools, and the support that we're providing to our unaccredited schools. You know, in education, there is nothing new under the sun. There's no new strategy. There's no new initiative. There's not that one silver bullet. We already know what it takes to move or improve our schools. And as an academic team, we had to take a look at what we were doing. And I think Ron Edmonds says it best when he says, we can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need to do that. Whether or not we do it must finally depend on how we feel about the fact that we haven't so far. And if we took a look at our audit from our Council of Great City Schools, it urges us to focus on less. Less is more. And we have done just that. And so we're focused on a few things, those high leverage items. And we asked ourselves, what is it really going to take to move our district forward? One of our great philosophers, Dr. Mark T. Bedell, said this. He said, improving is hard work. To improve implies intent, consideration, and coordination. Tangible, significant, and sustainable progress can only happen with honest assessments, careful planning, and faithful execution. And this is a piece from our strategic plan that Dr. Bedell talked about this. And he was talking about that intentionality and making sure that we are coordinating. You remember the arrows and making sure everything was or is aligned. And he also talked about that honest assessment. And he always tells you, let's be clear. We have to be honest with ourselves and examine our current reality. I think Albert Einstein said it best when he says, no problem can be solved with the same level of consciousness that created it. And I'll have to tell you, I've been in this district, this is my 7th year, and for the first time, I feel that there's a clear focus, there's an aligned purpose, there's a clear focus on true instruction, that our schools are getting the same message from our curriculum instruction department when those coordinators go out to the buildings, and they receive the same message from our school leadership department. And that's in part by our planning process of what we do at the central office. And we meet weekly, every other week, together as a curriculum instruction team and a school leadership team to ensure that we are supporting our schools. So to share a little bit of that with you, Ms. Austin is going to talk about that focus and alignment.
Although I've been here just a short time, it was refreshing to see that we were going to go back to the instructional core and look at research involving the instructional core and focus deeply on 3 things. We know for a fact that principals impact instructional effectiveness as the leader in the building. So in order to do that, we want to influence that instructional core by looking at 3 things in the instructional core, which is content and curriculum, the skill of our teachers, and student engagement. So in looking at the instructional core, that causes us to look at effective leadership practices, effective organizational practices, and determining how we can empower our leaders and develop our leaders to capacity so that they are daily impacting that instructional core, thereby student achievement. Some of the things that we've done so far is really taken a look since mid-July at the needs assessment. And we know that we've rolled out a new curriculum, and it's based on the Missouri State standards. We know that we have an audit coming forth. The audit has already been done, and we know that we're going to see in-depth results of the audit from the Council of Great City Schools very soon. In addition to that, we have monthly teacher and principal training, staff development on accessing and implementing the curriculum at both PLCs, professional learning communities for principals and assistant principals, as well as our monthly principal meetings. We have organized activities for our principals to become acquainted with the curriculum and exactly what teachers are using so that when they go into the classrooms, it will look familiar. I think you're next. No. The next thing that we've done is taken a look at the second piece of the instructional core is the skill and the knowledge of the teacher. We, again, have provided monthly teacher trainings on the implementation of the standards in classrooms. A lot of that has been breaking down the standards and determining all the skills and activities that are en route to causing students to meet the standards. We're in the process at this time at developing a principal feedback tool, which is a rubric that will help principals focus on instruction when they're doing their 10-minute walkthroughs and to provide succinct, credible feedback. We're looking at having embedded professional development for our K-2 teachers in the area of literacy, especially in our focus and priority schools. In addition to that, after taking deep dives with the data, we've looked at our math, and we know that we have to be very intentional around math, especially Algebra 1. And so we're implementing quarterly professional development for all of our teachers in grades 3 through 9. And more importantly, because we know that big shifts are called for as a result of looking at our data, we've spent a great deal of time really looking at what our teachers need and focusing on developing a summer institute that will coach and teach the teachers exactly what they need to engage with their students, break down the standards, and effectively implement the curriculum.
And one thing we know about our students is that we must increase their level of engagement. And that's one thing that Richard Elmore talked about in the instructional core, and one of his catchphrases is indeed that task predicts performance. And so if you ask me to peel a vegetable, that's probably just only a small step to getting me to be a gourmet chef. Or if you ask me to just walk around the block one time, that's probably not going to get me ready for a marathon. And so if you would ask me to complete worksheets or drills in a classroom, or complete a list of facts to remember, that isn't going to equip me as a student to be able to analyze demanding text. Definitely not going to help me build strong arguments with credible evidence, or tackle scenarios or serious math or science challenges effectively. Sorry, I'm on that one right there. So what we know is what predicts performance is what the student is actually doing. And a lot of times we can go into classrooms and it appears that the students are engaged, and it appears like they are engaged in rigorous activities. But sometimes I always tell my principals that some of our teachers get engulfed in cute activities, and even principals as well, when they go in and look at it, it looks amazing, but is it rigorous? And is that task going to ensure that our students are ready for the assessment? And through our revised Wednesday PDs, we have monthly professional development with our teachers. And the focus on that is to improve those activities that are done in the classroom, those actual tasks. If we know that task predicts performance, how are we monitoring those tasks to ensure that our students are completing rigorous tasks? And so what we know is that the assessment definitely is rigorous. And so is that task aligned to that rigorous standard as well as that rigorous assessment? And so based on some of the feedback that we got, or perspectives from our teachers, they had this to say. They loved, and this was relative to the Wednesday PD, they love breaking down the standards, really getting down to the root of what the standard is really asking the students to do. They like having they wanted to have more workshops like this. They like the focus on the questioning as well. And so we do a lot of work around questioning. And what you'll find is that when you go in classrooms, teachers will tend to ask those low-level DOK1 questions. And so we're doing some work with questioning as well. And then, of course, that adjusting feedback. They want more time for this process. A little coffee would help in the morning for some of these morning sessions. And so we have to make sure we have the coffee for our teachers. And they wanted to have more on-site PD. And so we look at the work that we're doing with our building principals and vice principals. As Ms. Austin stated, we meet with our principals twice a month. We have our all principals meeting, which we have one first thing in the morning. We've actually extended those hours as well to 2:30 for our principals. And then we have our monthly principal PLCs, which are those professional learning communities, where we meet at different schools each month. And so we have 4 groups meeting at 4 different schools each month, and we do walkthroughs. They're, again, aligned to the instructional core. So when we're doing those walkthroughs, we're going in, we're looking at the task that the students are engaged in. We're looking at the standard to see is the task aligned to the standard. And if we are fortunate enough to go in there and do an assessment, we're looking at the assessment to see if the assessment is definitely aligned to the rigorous task. The rigorous task. In addition, we meet with our vice principals. Last year, we met with our vice principals, and this was something that Dr. Bedell definitely charged us with, is how we're doing with developing our next-tier leaders. So last year, we met with our vice principals 3 times a year. This year, we're meeting with them 7 times a year. And there again, we're giving them the same content, the same PD that we're giving our principals, and that is that work around the instructional core. And we're really excited about the feedback that we got from some of our principals relative to the professional development and this focus on the instructional core. One principal said this: I really appreciated delving into the instructional core. The opportunity to collaborate with colleagues and to hear their interpretation of the material was significant. I really like this quote: I am always inspired by Dr. Bedell, because Dr. Bedell, he's there at those meetings, those vice principal meetings and principals meetings, and he's addressing those principals and vice principals to ensure that we are aligned. He said, I'm always inspired by Dr. Bedell. I appreciate the passion, expertise, and earnestness of our 2 assistant superintendents. That will be me and Elizabeth. I walked away with a lot of tangible takeaways from the instructional core reading and conversation in regard to coaching teachers. And then, of course, that last line or that last comment, that this principal felt that our leadership team is definitely moving in the right direction. And we talk about that alignment piece. It's also important to understand that the work that we're doing with our principals and our teachers in terms of ensuring that we have effective leaders in the building is aligned to our strategic priority 9.2, which is building capable and empowered leaders. And of course, this standard asks us to provide training and ongoing capacity building for the leadership team at each building, with particular emphasis on strengthening the effectiveness of instruction, using data about student learning and professional practices to improve those outcomes. And the quote here is a quote from a vice principal that's very excited about the fact that the vice principal are receiving PD around the instructional core, and most importantly, the benefits of just the networking with other vice principals, that they're able to kind of bounce ideas off of those individuals, just as this strategic priority asks us to do. So, Ms. Austin, now we're going to begin to share with you, so what does it look like at the building level for in terms of our support for our schools?
So we're going to take a look now at fully accredited schools, provisionally accredited schools, and non-accredited schools that are currently in our district. At this time, we have 13 schools that are fully accredited. And if you take a look at the sections, academic achievement, subgroup achievement, and attendance achievement, these are the categories in which the MSIP-5, the Missouri School Improvement Program, gives us scores. We are scored in 3 of 5 areas for our elementary schools. And for our elementary schools, the categories are academic achievement, subgroup achievement, and attendance achievement. We also collaborated and took a look at what we do that contributes to overall achievement. So those bottom bullets, those 4 bullets under overall achievement, are things that go into each of the categories. On the way a school is determined to be accredited or not is that a school will earn 70% or more of the annual performance report, or APR, points possible. So we have 13 schools in our district that in 2015 and 16 have earned 70% or more of the APR points possible. The items that you see in each of the categories are items that school leadership is providing to each of these 13 schools in order to cause the schools to increase their achievement at a higher level. Now we're going to take a look at an exemplar of a fully accredited school. On the left upper, you'll see special characteristics. Of particular interest, you'll notice that this exemplar school is 70% English language learners, which is well over the district average of 30.2%. You'll see that we are over the district average in terms of Hispanic students at this school as well. When you take a look at our MPI, you'll notice that at this school in communication arts, we have had some steady, we have our communication arts about even, and then we have some preliminary data that tells us what our 2017 scores may look like, and that's in the gray area. One of the things that Dr. Lewis and I are very intentional about are those MSIP standards, the academic achievement, the subgroup achievement, and the attendance achievement. And that is how we will get all of our schools to 100%. What we know about this particular school is it's about 16% in percentage points from 100%. We also know by diving into their data and looking at each area of English language learner instruction, as well as English language arts instruction, specifically in 3rd and 6th grade, that we need to focus resources there and take a look at how the task, the objective, and the teacher are working to teach these items, because that's an area of growth. We also, at this particular school, have a SAM principal, and that refers to a program that is School Administrator Manager that causes principals to be more intentional and effective in use of their time. Specifically, having principals be in classrooms a minimum of 50% of their time. So that's an exemplar of a fully accredited school. Next, we're going to take a look at our provisionally accredited schools. In our district at this time, we have 14 schools that are provisionally accredited. You'll see that there are different supports in addition to the other supports that were mentioned for the accredited schools in order to cause these schools to increase their percentage on the MSIP. We're intentional about assuring that we encourage the administrators to become SAMS principals. We're intentional about increasing the site visits and coaching, so we spend more time in these schools in order to monitor and work side by side in order to increase learning. We also are looking at that quarterly math training that I spoke about earlier and looking at different ways to cause our students to become higher achieving. Our next slide takes a look at an exemplar of a provisionally accredited school. And you'll notice at this school, we have, again, another high population of English language learners, and we have a balance of Black and Hispanic students. And our Hispanic students, though, are over the district average. If you take a look at the MSIP standards, we just have 5 there, we can see that we've earned 58% of our points in academic achievement, 58% in our subgroup achievement, and 95% in attendance. Now, if you take a look at the graphs that show the growth from school year 15 to provisionally school year 17, you'll see that we have had very steady growth and potentially extraordinary growth in both math and science. What that shows us, really, when you compare the graphs and the attendance standard, is that if we have our kids here, we can teach them. In addition to that, we also know that we're only We're only 6% away from being fully accredited. We know that we still need more supports in 3rd and 6th grade, specifically in the areas of reading and research. We know that very specifically, even though these science standards are excellent, or these science scores look excellent, we need to look at force and motion, earth systems, and scientific inquiry. At this particular school, we have content departmentalization, and the principal is a SAM manager. Well, I'm concerned about what we're missing.
Okay.
But I'm not going to be, I guess. Should I help with something?
All right. In addition to the supports that we're providing to all our schools, what specifically are we doing for those two unaccredited schools? We have two unaccredited schools in our district. And so with these particular schools, there has been an increased presence, if you will, or focus from our curriculum instruction and school leadership department. More services offered to these buildings. For example, we went out with our school leadership department, went out with our curriculum instruction department a couple of weeks ago, met with the principal and his leadership team. We did a walkthrough of all the classrooms and kind of got a snapshot of what instruction looks like in that building. And so as a result of that, the curriculum instruction department will provide 2 additional days per month at these schools, at this particular school, and we have a visit for the other school coming up. 2 additional professional development days just for those teachers, centered around the look-fors or the items that we looked at during our instructional walks. They're again still aligned to the instructional core. We're customizing our data and coaching and feedback. And so in these buildings, there's a vast difference in terms of where some of our teachers are. We have some new teachers in these buildings. We have some teachers that have been here a while, and they need different things. And so we're customizing that feedback. When I say we, the school leadership department, when we're working with those principals, what does this coaching look like for this teachers? Okay, let's role play. If you know this teacher's going to say this, or well, how can we say this? And so we're kind of serving as those thought partners as we go out to work with those principals. One school in particular, there was a struggle with attendance. And so all of our schools have weekly attendance meetings. Well, this particular school now has daily attendance meetings, 10 o'clock every day. They're looking at attendance and making those additional phone calls and doing things over and above to ensure that they get those points relative to attendance. And some of the support that we provided our students has some budget implications. Thank you, Aaron Thompson, where we increased our assistant principal allocation at these 2 sites. And so what we were finding is that our principals were, running around, handling operational type things and trying to keep their pulse on instruction. And so we provide an additional FTE for our assistant principal at these 2 schools. In addition, we have a principal coach that's working with one of our principals in these schools. And this is one of our retired effective principals, and she's working with this principal 3 days a week. And so these are just some of the things that we're doing for our unaccredited schools to make sure that we are moving the needle in terms of moving them from unaccredited. And so an unaccredited school is a school that has 50% or less of their APR points. And so how do we get these schools to that next level? Glad you asked. The next slide shows one of our schools, one of our accredited schools. And so with this particular school, unaccredited, remember, we always want to get to the floor, which is 300 of our MPI points. And you see where this school is relative to the MPI points in communication arts, math, and science. In addition, you also see the proficient or advanced over there on the side. And we've had this data for a number of years. So now that we have this data now, what does that mean? And what does that look like in terms of our support? So as Ms. Austin indicated, we drill down not just to say, okay, we have almost 8% of our students that are proficient or advanced in science. So what do? You just provide more science instruction? No, you dig down deeper into the data to find out what are our students missing in science. And so at this particular school, it was force and motion and scientific inquiry. And what we found out is that the scientific inquiry is not just memorizing the scientific method, but you'll see the scientific inquiry process over in passages into science. And so how can students apply that scientific inquiry process in a number of ways? So this standard, this content can be presented in many different ways, and not just, they're again going to that task and that DOK 1 level. It's not just a matter of reciting the scientific method. That's just one part of it. But how are you able to apply the knowledge that you have about the scientific method? So this school also areas of focus is third grade ELA and sixth grade ELA, reading comprehension in particular, and then research on another, and then math was grades 4 and 5. And in math, it was measurement and data, which is also, when we talk about measurement and data, it's not just a ruler measuring how long something is, but it's that time in there too, elapsed time. That's measurement too, and that's always a difficult area for our students to grasp. Fifth grade struggled a little bit with algebraic operations and algebraic thinking. And there again for our science, force in motion, and scientific inquiry. So this is how we drill down, not just saying, okay, we need 12.9 points to get to provisional credit. So how are we going to get there? By focusing on these particular things. And so when we go in these classrooms, when we do these walks, there again, if we know that measurement and data is a area we need to focus on. So in that math lesson, when the teacher's going over this measurement and data content, we're looking at the task. Is that task aligned? And sometimes we like to pull things from the internet that say let's search measurement and data. It may be a great activity, and students may appear to master that worksheet, but when they're given the assessment, the level of the assessment is here. And so we're kind of reframing our thought processes of our principals in terms of not just looking at is a class quiet? Are all the students appear to be engaged? But what is that level of rigor? And so we're doing a lot of work with the Hess Matrix. Dr. Hess is a professor from Harvard University, and she combined the Webb's DOK along with Bloom's taxonomy. And we gave our principals and vice principals a chart that kind of opened their eyes to what does rigor really look like and how can we increase the level of rigor in our class. And rigor is not just giving them more work or giving them harder work or at a higher grade level, but it's a continuum. There's the times where you're going to have those basic concepts. You're going to have those DOK 1 level, identify these things. And I often use the example of sales. And so there are times when students will need to identify the parts of the sale. But more often than not, we used to just stop there. Okay, yes, this child can identify the parts of the sale. But how can we take it to a DOK 4 now, or 3? Let's compare and contrast an animal sale to a plant sale. So with that, you're going to have to be able to identify the cells. Now you're going to have to be able to know that plant cell has a cell wall. Plant cells has chloroplasts, things like that. And so this is the direction we're taking our principals in terms of really looking at that DOK. Yeah, even tomorrow at our principals meeting. So as we mentioned, our principals meetings you won't come to a principals meeting and see announcements. It's professionally development driven. We have breakout sessions. For tomorrow, we have ELL, math and science breakout, or math and ELA breakout session. So it's definitely geared toward the instructional core. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just had to kind of chime in here. Tomorrow at our principals meeting, we're taking depth of knowledge, DOK, and breaking down standards at the elementary, middle, and high school level that deal with inverse operations. So we define inverse operations, then we take the standard at the 4th grade level, the 8th grade level, and the Algebra 1 level, and we look at what the end expectation is, and our principals are going to be provided about 6 different activities, and look at the activities, the tasks, and determine which ones are at what depth of knowledge levels. They're going to justify why they think so. They're going to put them in order, and they're going to design a chart that they will need to present to their peers justifying their responses. And so we model adult learning strategies that we also want our principals to use with their teachers and teachers to use as appropriate with students.
And while we're on principals meeting, I do have to give a shout out to Aaron Thompson for being flexible with our principals meetings. As I mentioned, our principal meetings are not just about managerial and operational things. In the past, we've had budget meetings. While budgets are important, and principals need to be aware of what's in their budget and how to spend their money, but I want to give kudos to Aaron for being flexible, because we had to boot her out of one of our principals meetings to focus on this instructional piece. So thank you, Aaron. So even though our middle schools don't have a designation yet in terms of whether they're accredited or unaccredited, or we do want to talk about the support that we're providing to our middle schools. And so there again, the additional support that we're providing to most of our other schools. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing in addition at our middle schools. Toward the bottom, of course, we have our Center for Conflict Resolution, and this is new for our middle schools, and this is where they provide restorative justice practices in our middle schools. What we noticed is that our discipline infractions were kind of high at our middle schools. So what are we doing? We partnered with the Center for Conflict Resolution, and they're going to provide training to all of the staff to help kind of promote conflict resolution, to help our students resolve conflicts amongst themselves. Because we know if we don't teach them that now, once they get out of our buildings and there's a conflict, more severe things can happen. We're excited about our extended learning opportunities. Christy Harrison is leading this charge. As a matter of fact, she's in Baltimore right now looking at some extended learning opportunities there, and she's excited about what she's seeing. But this is where we want to provide opportunities outside the regular school day. And so what we know is that our principals need master schedule training. And the purpose of this is to ensure that they are proficient at developing a schedule for the needs of their buildings. And so there are times when, we're asking them to develop a intervention block or intervention period of about 40 minutes to ensure that our students get those supports. Now, the extended learning is after school, and we do recognize that there are many variables that prevent our students from staying after school. So during the block of time that we have them, what type of interventions can we put in place? And so with the master schedule training, in conjunction working with our Chris Harrison, our extended learning opportunities, who's very well versed in RTI, response to intervention, she's going to work with those principals to ensure that there's quality intervention, not just a 40-minute block, but what are you going to do with that 40-minute block? And that should be true intervention. Of course, our communities and schools, this is where we have a site coordinator that's at each one of our middle schools, and they kind of fill a pivotal role in terms of ensuring that they are providing support to our students to remove any of those other barriers, our students and families that can potentially move any of those barriers to learning. They work closely with our building principals to identify those needs, and then they go out, boots on the ground, to find those needs and to find those supports for our students. Of course, we have City Year, and they're concerned about early warning indications, those what they call the ABCs, the attendance, behavior, and the core academics. And because we know that any one of those signs, a deficit in any one of those signs is definitely an early indicator in terms of if a student is going to be a dropout or not. There again, we do provide instructional support there again with those middle schools to ramp up the level of engagement and rigor in those classes as well. So that's just kind of a snapshot of what we're doing in our buildings relative to the instructional core. There again, we're focusing on those three things. What's the student doing? How is the student engaged in the content? And what's the teacher level relative to that content?
All right, thank you for that presentation. And before we address any questions that our board or community members may have, what we wanted to display to all of you today is that everything that we're doing is going to be focused on providing a rich educational experience for our students. You can't do these things if people aren't trained. You can't give keys to a car that you don't know how to drive. And that's why it's very critical that we provide professional development that is very tight, that is aligned, and that we're not just doing professional development for the sake of doing it. As you have heard multiple times, this instructional framework that we have introduced to this school district this year allows for us to be very intentional, very tight, and it allows for us to also have a strict, adhesive connection directly to our strategic plan. So everything that we do, we focus and we tie it into our strategic plan in terms of the student goals and the outcomes that we want to see happen in that area. We think that's very, very critical. Another piece that I do want to share with you is when you think about our 13 schools that are fully accredited, and this really goes back to the leadership component. 9 out of those 13 schools that are fully accredited, they've had a principal in that school for 3 years or more. And so what we do know is that we need time. Our principals need time to put their systems in place. And what we try to do is stay focused on 3 things. We don't need to do any more than that, because once you start doing more than 3 things within your schools, it's going to be impossible to move the needle. We also know that we want to be able to move more of our schools that are provisionally accredited over to being fully accredited. And we're going to continue to focus on that. So the exemplars that you saw, we have that for each of our schools. How far away are they from being able to be moved from unaccredited to accredited, from provisionally accredited to being fully accredited? We have a pulse on that. But the last thing I will say as I close out my remarks is that we talked about really redesigning the work that we do in our principal meetings. And if we're not afraid, like, we're not going to sit here and just talk to the community and just say things that make you think that, oh, they're doing things differently. I invite any of our board members to just pop up. I want you to look at the kind of work that our principals are engaged in, our assistant principals are engaged in, and you will see the direct alignment to our instructional framework here by Elmore, but you also see a direct alignment to the strategic plan that you all approved in September.
Thank you. And thank you for this presentation, specifically for the framing and how you embedded it in research and how that's a guiding light as we move through what we're doing. And then also really matching the intervention to the condition. And so really clearly being able to see, you know, where we are at that particular level, provisional, unaccredited, or accredited, and how those interventions match up. Because oftentimes we just kind of get it all together in one fell swoop. So I really appreciate the level of detail and giving us this particular frame. But want to open it up to board members to ask questions. Yes, Board Member Manser.
Yes, this was very helpful. And I really appreciate the layout. As the board chair said, I think I have a much better feel for how principals are being supported and guided. So you talked a little bit about this SAM model, and I have just the barest familiarity with it. I know that that's a model, school administration manager, that's being used in other states. When you said you're encouraging principals to adopt or go through the SAM model, is this a training that they have to do outside of Kansas City, or could you say a little bit more about how you acquire that SAM credential, so to speak, and how long it takes?
Yeah, sure. SAM is, as you stated, school administrator manager. We first brought SAM to the district when we had our 5 SIG schools, probably about, I guess, 4 years ago, and we saw great results in terms of them being able to improve or increase their time on instruction. So what it does, it's a process. I wouldn't call it professional development, but it's a process. And so what they do is they come out and shadow you, and they do mean shadow. As a matter of fact, the person dresses in all black and follows the principal around for an entire week. Talk about creepy. Except the restroom. They don't go to the restroom with it, but they're right outside the door. And they won't speak to you either. And I remember my first time going over to a building, I was talking to a principal, and the shadow was sitting behind the door, and I kind of spoke to him, and she kind of put her head down, because they are so intentional in terms of capturing what that principal is doing at that time. So what they do during that week, for every 5 minutes, they categorize what the principal is doing every 5 minutes, whether it's managerial, instructional, or personal. And then at the end of those 5 weeks, they give the principals their baseline data that tells them how much time they're spending on instruction. And we would ask our principals, how much time do you think you're spending on instruction? They would say 60%, 70%. But most of our principals are around the 13 to 20% on instruction. And so as a result of that, they set goals that I want. So if you're at, say, 14% based on your baseline, you set a goal, a realistic goal that you want to increase it to maybe 30 or 40. Now, how they do that, they meet with, this is where they get the name, they meet with their SAM, who is someone that they designate in their building. It could be a secretary or an instructional coach that's going to meet with them daily to outline their calendar. And so what you're paying for is a calendar. It's almost like an Outlook calendar on steroids. And so the SAM will code what you need to do, for that next day. All right, I need to get in Miss Robinson's class. So she put that in there. That's instructional. Then at the end of the day, she holds you accountable. Did you get in Miss Robinson's class? What did you see? What type of feedback do you want to give Miss Robinson? Well, let me schedule that feedback for you. And so now it's intentional because our principals have done a good job of getting in the classrooms, but not so much of a good job of giving that feedback. So this forces them to get in that classroom and give feedback. And so the time for this process, there is a couple of days on the front end just for orientation and introduction, and then they send what they call time change coaches out to the buildings to work with the SAM and the principal once a month. And that, now when we brought it with the SIG funds, we paid with our SIG funds. DESE has now approved this for all of our focus schools. So DESE is paying it for all of our focus schools. Now we do have some schools that we were able to fund through some old Pioneer grants that are part of SAM's, and one or two principals are paying for it out of their own budget. But DESE has taken this and it has become a part of the Missouri Leadership Development Program, so statewide.
And I know they go on an annual professional development trip with other schools around the country that's involved in this too, right?
Yes, and it's professional development like I've never seen. And Mark Schellinger, who's the guy that started the SAMs probably over 10, 12 years ago, received funding through the Wallace Foundation to actually fund this. And so he treats principals. He wants to have this opportunity to treat principals as if they're kings, and they are. You ever go to the airport and someone's holding a sign with your name on it? I mean, I don't have that much money to do that, but that's what they do. They said,
Sue
Sam,
says
I'm your driver.
otherwise, but go ahead.
Huh? What'd you say? But starting from the airport, they treat you like that, and they have a driver. They put you in 5-star hotels, but they have the best speakers to come in there. Paul Brambrick, Santoya. Many of the speakers that we brought here was a result of us hearing them at the SAMS conference. Dinner, oh my God, lobster, mahi. And so, for example, it's in an island off Florida in January. And last year it was in Tucson, Arizona. I mean, but our principals walk away with so much knowledge gained from that professional development. And our very own Dr. Carol Howard presented at the SAMS conference on last year.
Board Member Wolfsey?
Great presentation. And I will say, based on that, SAMS, I had a chance to visit a school with a principal that was using it, and it was fascinating for him to show me the insight that he saw in his own practice and how he can show me the days when he does have a VP, how his time is, utilized, and those more time in the classroom than when he doesn't. So I found it fascinating, and I would be interested to know which schools in particular are using SAMs, just to me is another data point. I'm just going to say I'd like to challenge my colleagues to take Dr. Lewis up on the offer to attend these sessions. I'm going to now come to one. I went to part of their training, I think, that you did in that week long, and it was very helpful to me as a board member to understand some of these fundamental changes that we are implementing at the leadership level. So I would just highly encourage you you don't have to go the whole day, but you can just drop in and see what's going on.
Anytime tomorrow at Manual between 8 and 2, you're more than welcome.
Yes, Mr. Evans?
I know how important attendance is to academic achievement. Very critical. I am also interested in knowing, how do you think, I wrote it down, extracurricular activities are to academic achievement also?
I'd like to answer that one, sir. It's very critical. I recently attended a volleyball tournament this past Saturday at Central, and we had people from other schools in there. It was just awesome. We had 3 courts, trying to figure out how we can get a 4th court up because there was some little logistical issues. But I know I tweeted out not too long ago that extracurricular activities are second to none. I wholeheartedly believe that if we can keep our kids involved in positive social connections and social organizations, it gives them a different level of connection to that school, a sense of affinity and love for that particular school. And I will use, for example, I'll use Central, for example. They just started their soccer team. They created a new band. They have dancers that are performing with the band. They've probably picked up, and I know the football team is much larger than it was last year because I was concerned about somebody getting hurt and we're having a forfeit. So I can honestly sit here and say that they've picked up 60 to 70 kids who are now involved every day of the week, at least Monday through Thursday, and then there's a game Friday or Saturday. It has made a huge difference. Dr. Sanders, our new athletic director, gave me a report, and he said, you won't believe this, but our numbers, in particular for our sports, they're way up across the board from last year. And I think a lot of it is because of the new amenities, the board approving the execution of the bonds and being able to put new fields, new gyms in, and then the other social organizations that our teachers are stepping up and sponsoring now for kids who may not be interested in sports. You're seeing more people now, they're buying into it, and I think that is going to pay huge dividends for us when we get to the end of this school year.
Let me just run through these examples, the 3 examples that you had, because I want to ask you a question related to our African American population. So with the fully accredited school, we have 20% African American. Now jump to the provisional accredited, 39.6% African American. Now jump to the unaccredited, 91.7 African American. What conversations are we having about race as it relates to our current condition?
I will tell you, at our last leadership summit, Ms. Wolfsey can probably tell you, we began those conversations with our principals. And what we have to do as a district is create those spaces where we can have those honest conversations about race. Of course, Jennifer Collier shared some data with you several board meetings ago about the makeup of our teachers, in that more than 70% of our teachers are white, yet about 70% of our students are minority. So what does that look like in the classroom, and creating those spaces to really talk about some of those unconscious biases that some of our teachers may have, and the expectations as well. You know, we talked about Elmore says that task predicts performance. Well, I would add that expectations predicts the task. And so creating those spaces, and we do that at our principals meeting. First, we have to start with the principals, and so we want them to create those spaces in their buildings to have some of those honest conversations about race and the expectation of our students.
And Madam Chair, one of the things that I have clearly stated, and any time that I speak now, it's about expectations. I talk to people about it's the way that we see kids and what we believe they can or cannot do. And what we want to create in this school system is that every single one of our kids have a gift. It's our job to try to figure out what that gift is and then to leverage that gift in order for these kids to be able to flourish. And so I talk often about what if everybody in this room were staff members at a particular school, and let's say this school is 92% of the children are African American students. They come from a background where some of the social and emotional supports may not necessarily be in place for a great majority of the kids. And ultimately our advocacy, and I'm just telling you this from personal experience, advocacy is not as high as it needs to be because we kind of feel that there isn't much accountability and nobody's going to hold us accountable, so why even put forth that effort? And I'm not saying that that's happening, you know, in this particular school. What I can tell you in my experience of working in school districts around the country, that this absolutely does happen. But if we all took the approach of doing nothing but providing words of affirmation, I don't care how bad the kid is, I thank you for you. I'm glad you're here today. I know you might terrorize from time to time, but there's a gift in you. You're intelligent. Thank you for coming to school today. And just do nothing but positive words of affirmation. I think imagine what that would do to the mindset of our kids who may, in many cases, have been told what they can't do. And they develop this sense of learned helplessness. So that's really the culture, Madam Chair, that we are really building and creating here in how we build our relationships with our kids, but then to have that expectation. Because I went into every single high school last year and told the kids, you don't get to use your circumstances as a crutch. We will hold you accountable, and you can't throw that at me that because of what you're going through, you can't make it. But we have to do that continuously, and then they begin to realize that you care. And I can tell you, when I go to some of these high schools in particular, and I'm gonna work my way to middle school and elementary, those kids that I've spoken to at those high schools will tell you, they know me. They run up to me, Dr. Bedell, and they want to share with me what's going on in their lives. But we do that as a whole with everybody.
Go ahead, Board Member Lewis.
Thank you for the presentation. We talk about equity a lot. And unless I'm misreading or misunderstanding, when I look at the slides that talk about the support for the different school categories, and I look at the types of things that's listed as a bullet point under the fully accredited schools, and then I look at that same page for provisional credit, and I see fewer bullet points and kind of less specific things. And then I get to the page for the unaccredited schools, and I see even less. So I don't understand where the equity is.
And
I don't understand.
Okay.
And wait, hold on. And I get 100% that it takes time. And I get that we have a whole different level of quality in our front office, certainly in our superintendent role, even on the board. So this is an incredible, perfect time for us. And I get that it takes time, but I hope that while we're being realistic on the infrastructure that we need to build and getting the principals prepared, that we still, I was just gonna say the H word, but I'm not. I just hope we fight like heck to figure out how we can get some immediate learning going on and some immediate returns tomorrow as kids are showing up. So there's some teaching and learning going on tomorrow, even while we're building that infrastructure.
And let me just respond to that. These supports are, if you notice how they dwindle down as we go through, these are supports in addition to all of the other things. This is what's different beyond what other schools are getting.
But City Year isn't in Southwest. Communities and schools, are they in Southwest? Southeast? Are those programs in that building? Okay, so I hear what you're saying. I appreciate what you're saying. Another piece, if we're truly going to have this equity conversation, is we have to probably get away from just the laundry list of bullet points that apply to some schools but not all schools, and we have some supports, because I still don't know where the gap is. If we have babies in those unaccredited schools that have higher level of trauma, we may need 2 VPs. We may need, and those are the ones that we're supposed to have accelerated learning. So they're supposed to get more so they can progress more. And I don't see that reflected. I see a lot of improvement, don't get me wrong, but I don't see that in this picture yet.
I just want to make sure that I, excuse me, as it relates to this presentation, you gave us overall interventions for the entire district, and then what the schools are getting, the fully accredited, or what all the schools are receive, like interventions that they have access to, and then as you cut down, those are additional. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Okay. Oh, okay, great. Other questions? Great. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is our monthly, it's the business items. Do we have any business? Okay. No business items to present before the board. If there's nothing to come before the body, any additional items, then we stand adjourned. Thank you. We do have 10 minutes worth of business back in the other room. Thank you to our public for coming out. We will see you next time.